My name is Kaela Fennell-Chin, and I'm going to be doing interactive learning number 1. And since my GTID ends in the number 2, I'm going to be doing problems 1A. So first we have a piecewise function, and we're going to try to graph this function. But first we have to know a few things about parent functions and a little bit of algebra. Okay, so as you can see here, I have written down parent function, and one that we need to specifically know for this problem is the absolute value of x. When you graph the absolute value of x, you're going to get a V-shaped, and that's just something that you have to know. Next, we need to know a little bit about algebra as well when dealing with the greater than or equal to signs. So in the first one we have x is less than 0. And that means at that point 0, it won't necessarily be defined by the absolute value of x function, but rather at this function, since the next problem says 0 is less than or equal to for this function right here. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about our parent function that we're going to have to use, and about a little bit of algebra with the less than or equal to signs, we can start graphing our function. So first we're going to look at the absolute value of x. Since it says that x is less than 0 where it is the absolute value of x, that means at that point 0 it is not necessarily part of that graph. So we can start by putting a circle, an open circle at the point 0. Now everything to the left of 0 is going to be defined by the absolute value of x function. So we can continue this line all the way up to this point, and it's going to keep on going all the way into infinity for that specific part of the graph. Second function in our piecewise function, it says from 0 to 5. So what we can do first is let's try to factor this equation right now so we can see what can be canceled out. So we have x plus 1, then x minus 1, all over x minus 1. And then these are going to cross out, and then all you're left is with x plus 1. Now that is going to be the graph that you're graphing. However, what we just cancel out is going to be a hole in our graph. So we're going to have a hole at 1. What we want to do is we want to look at this function again, and it goes all the way up to 5. We want to see what our y value will be in this function when it's at x is equal to 5. So what we can do is 5 squared minus 1 over 5 minus 1. So that's going to be equal to is 25 minus 1 over 5 minus 1. That's going to be equal to 24 over 4, which is equal to 6. So that means we can graph now at 5, and since it's not actually equal to, that means there might be a hole at that point. As you can see, what I did was I plugged in 5 into my function, since that's the endpoint of that function, and I got 6. So I went over 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I went up 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I got this point. And since it is not equal to, I put an open circle. What I'm going to do is find what y value we will have when x is 0. And since it is a less than and equal to sign, that means at that point it will have a closed circle. So what I want to do is plug in 0. So we have 0 squared minus 1 over 0 minus 1. And what you're going to get is negative 1 over negative 1, which is equal to 1. So that means at this point where 0, 1 is going to be a closed circle. And now we can connect our line. And that is our second part of our piecewise function. However, since we just graphed it, but what we forgot to do was take into consideration our whole. So at our point 1, where x is 1, we are going to have a whole. What you have to do is where x is 1, just put a hole right there. But then you can see the third part of our piecewise function is that where x is equal to 1, y is actually negative 1. So when x is equal to 1, y is going to be negative 1. Now for our last part of our piecewise function, we have negative x plus 3, where 5 is less than or equal to x. So that means at point 5, we will have a closed circle because it is equal to. And now if we wanted to graph it, we see that it's a negative slope because x is negative, and our intercept for y is going to be at 3. For our last part of our piecewise function, where we have negative x plus 3, where 5 is less than or equal to x, we know that we're going to have a closed circle, but now we need to find where we're going to start our graph. So let's plug in 5 to see where our y value is going to be. So we have negative 5 plus 3 is equal to negative 2. Now what we do is we go to 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and go down to negative 2. 1, 2. And right here we're going to have a closed circle since it's equal to. And then since it's a negative slope, we're just going to continue our graph down. And this part of our piecewise function is going to define the rest of x when it's greater than 5. So now let's just go over what we have here. So we have a parent function, so we have to know what the graph of the absolute value of x is equal to, which is just a v. But it's only when x is less than 0. So at 0, since it's not equal to, we're going to have an open circle, and it's going to go all the way up since it's defined everything less than 0. Then at 0, we're going to be defined by this function here. So if we plug in 0, which we did here, we get 1. So at this point, it's going to be a closed circle at 1. And when we factored out our whole in this graph here, we found that our whole was at 1. So where x is equal to 1, we're going to have a whole. And then at the end of this part of our function, we have 5. And if you plug in 5, you get your value y of 6. So we're going to go to 5 and then 6. But since it's not equal to, we're going to have a whole. Then for our last part, second to last part, we have negative 1 is y when x is 1. So for when x is 1, we're going to have y is negative 1. So it is defined at that point, just not by this graph here. Then for our last part of our piecewise function, we have the negative x plus 3. And if we want to find out where our y value is, we're going to plug in 5 and we get negative 2. So you go to 5, negative 2, and then this function defines the rest of x. So it's going to continue on. So this is my problem. Thank you.